I've been friends with Art for a long time. We live in a small town, and had first met at the one playground that the town had. He was building a complicated sandcastle, which was awe-inspiring to the 6-year-old me. He was the same age, but way advanced in the art of sand packing. I had joined in, and followed his instructions to help build a moat. From then, Art and I were firm friends. His parents named him Arthur, but Art always sounded right to me. More him. After all, he was an artist. When Art first showed me his drawings more than 10 years ago, at the tender age of 7, they had still been amateurish. I was still really impressed though. His skills were far beyond what my own 7-year-old hands could achieve. Where I was still drawing snowmen with circles, he was drawing faces and figures which bore distinctive resemblances to the people they were based on. By the time we were in our teens, Art had blossomed so much as an artist that he had been transferred from our regular high school into a school meant for gifted artists. His drawings morphed into realistic portraits of people, things, and nature. Despite the realism, the drawings retained a style that was distinctly his. He had this way of capturing people's expressions, quirks, and nuances that really brought his drawings to life. He kept drawing, and they kept getting better. I noticed that he stopped drawing pictures of actual objects in the world. Instead, he turned to creating places, people, and things that were pulled from his imagination. He said that the world was too dark, too cold and cruel a place to be worth recreating art. He had always been a rather pessimistic, cynical person, so I wasn't surprised by this. I didn't mind. He was still a hell of a good friend, and personally, I preferred his new artworks to the old. When it came to choose a college, he decided to go to the local college with me. He said that he was sick of being saturated in the arts and wanted to go to a college that offered a variety. I was pleased. I figured we'd have a good time together in college. In our first year, we spent a lot of time together. However, every night after 9 p.m, he'd retreat back to his room to draw. Sometimes I hung out in his room, studying or working on my personal research. However, as time went by, I started spending more nights out partying and chilling at other friends' hangouts. I stopped inviting him along for every event, given his usual declination. We still remained good friends though. That never changed. Art became more and more reclusive, hardly making friends with anyone else. He developed more extreme views of society and the world. In soft tones, he would tell me all about what was wrong with the world and how it can't be saved. That the world as it was doomed. It didn't affect our friendship. I actually liked his musings and found him interesting in a weird way. I got close to quite a few other friends too, especially Nathan. He was like my brother that I never had. We met during our first lecture in a math module and hit it off right away. Soon, we were hanging out almost every day, and we gradually picked up Eddie and Sean along the way, and the 4 of us became pretty good friends. Nathan went missing 2 months ago. I wasn't shocked when I first heard that he hadn't returned home after a party at a friend's. He was quite the drinker, and I figured he'd drunk himself silly and was sleeping it off somewhere in town. But when he didn't show for the whole of the next day, I got really concerned. I must have called him 20 times over that night, when I realized I hadn't seen him in any of the lectures we had together. His parents were really worried too, but we held out hope that he was just dealing with a nasty hangover somewhere, that he had his own reasons for not wanting to get home just yet. I remember the sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach when the next day came and passed, and there was still no sign of him. It was soon a full 48 hours since anyone last saw him, and his parents made a police report. The sheriff and his people were everywhere for the next week. I was the first to be interviewed. I told them everything I remembered from the night he went missing. I was at the party too, and we were both downing shots like there was no tomorrow. I'd gotten pretty tipsy, but he was still going strong, what with his stomach of steel and whatnot. I'd got separated from him when he left the party to answer a call. I was roped into a game of beer pong, which I lost terribly, which meant I had to down many more cups of beer. The rest of the night was a haze, and I didn't remember him coming back in. I wasn't worried then, as we often went our own ways and did our own things at parties. No one else remembered anything of use too. Someone remembered seeing him frowning and speaking on the phone out of the front yard, but didn't see where he went after. By the time Nathan had been missing for 2 weeks, we had all started to fear the worst. The police investigation went on, but no one seemed to be looking very hard. Eddie and Sean came over often. They knew how close Nathan and I had been, and how hard hit I was by Nathan's disappearance. We'd talk about what could have happened, share our own theories. None of us wanted to talk about the theory that was in the forefront of our minds, that something bad had happened to him, and that he was never coming back. Then, Eddie went missing. This time, I was brought into the police station for a long 12-hour interrogation. I cried at some points, repeated the same story, the only one I knew, and answered all the questions they had. Sean was also brought in for questioning. When it was all over and we were both released home, I was in a bad state. It was the second time I'd lost a friend. Sean and I stopped hanging out after that. We were both too traumatized by the disappearance of Nathan and Eddie. Hanging out with Sean felt weird after that. Whenever I spoke to him, all I was reminded of was the absence of Nathan and Eddie. I think Sean felt that way too, for he stopped reaching out as well. I still met Art pretty often. I no longer went over to his place to hang out. He had said that he was in the midst of a major project, and his place was a war zone. Art tried to comfort me, but he wasn't very good at it. He just served up the usual platitudes. I'm sure they're fine. They're safe. You'll see them again, and so on. But he was a stable, comforting presence in my life, and it was good to just hang out without us saying much. Things went on like that for a while. Eddie and Nathan were nowhere to be found. Then Sean called me one night. He said that Art had invited him over to his place. Sean felt taken aback, as Art and him had barely hung out. They had exchanged only the perfunctory hellos when they had crossed paths due to me. Sean was at his front door, but everything was dark. He wanted to know if I was going to be there as well. Art had told him that he wanted to show him the latest piece he'd been working on. I was surprised and a little hurt. Art hadn't offered to show me, his oldest friend, his art piece. Why was he calling Sean, of all people, to see his work? Oh, he's here. He just came to the door. I'll talk to you later, okay? Sean said, and hung up. I texted Art to ask him about inviting Sean over. Art replied with a simple message. You can come over tomorrow. I let it be, and spent the night watching TV, distracting myself from the sadness and fear I felt for Nathan and Eddie. The next day, once class had ended, I went over to Art's place. He invited me into his room, and when he opened the door, I could see what he meant by saying it was a war zone. There was paper everywhere, on the floor, on an easel, pasted on the walls, and hung up on string. He cleared a path for me to the bed, and we sat down and stared at a few of the pieces of his recent artwork. They were beautiful. I soon realized that the different art pieces were snapshots and images from the same place. A place that had a magical quality to it. He drew cobblestone streets, lit with antiquated lamps at the sides, quaint stone cottages with lush gardens, and a forest that filled the background. He also drew pictures of a mountain in the distance, a town square, a library, and so on. He had created a whole town in art. Do you like them? He asked, anticipation lacing his voice. They're awesome. This place looks fantastic. How long did you spend on these? He grinned, pleased as punch. I've spent the last 6 months or so working on these. Here, this is the map of the town I'm creating. He sprawled out a map he had carefully constructed, complete with a legend, a scale, and different markings. I was blown away. Dude, you could be a city architect, or whatever they call those people who design cities. This is incredible. Man, I wish our town looked like this. I could tell that Art was immensely proud of his work. Then I caught a glimpse of anxiety in his eyes. He cleared his throat nervously, then picked up large squares of paper from his table. With a solemn gesture, he laid the pieces by my side. I picked the first one up. It was a drawing of a cottage, with old wooden floors, stone walls covered with vines, and big sunny windows. I froze. Someone was at a window. Someone who looked very much like Eddie. The Eddie in the picture was staring out of the window with wide eyes full of fear, his signature scar by his temple clearly pictured. He looked like he was trying to get the window open. He was moving. I looked at Art, in complete shock. He looked away. Trembling, I picked up the next piece of paper. It was Sean. Sean was pictured to be in a room, which contained a cheerful fireplace and a brown couch with colourful rugs strewn over it. Sean was sat in a corner of the room, hugging his knees, looking miserably at a fireplace. Then he turned to look at me and started to gesture frantically. I couldn't hear him, but his mouth was opening and closing, and I could see from the bulge in his forehead that he was yelling with all his might. I felt nausea rising within. I picked up the last piece of paper. Sure enough, there was Nathan. Nathan was by a river. He was seated with his back turned towards me, and he was still, for the most part. I could read his resignation by the slump on his shoulders. What's this? I choked out. How is this happening? Art finally turned to look at me. I wanted to create a town, a place that is full of beauty and comfort. Some place just for us, for the people who deserve it. I know you're close to Nathan, Eddie and Sean. I know they're nice guys too. I thought we could all hang out there instead. I looked at him, fighting the disbelief that enveloped me. Every time I looked up from the art pieces, I would immediately think that I was dreaming, that it wasn't really happening, that my senses were going crazy, that no one was really moving in these pictures. But every time I looked back down, there they were, still struggling with the window, still yelling, and still shifting about once in a while. How did you get them in? Art shrugged. I just kind of knew I could. As I was drawing this town, I just knew that it was a place that we could enter. I drew us all in. Then I got each of them to touch their drawings. They got sucked in then. I looked around. This had to be a joke, an elaborate plan, months in the making. It wasn't April, but perhaps there's some massive reality show going on. A show that involved everyone in town. The sheriff, the officers. It didn't make sense, I knew, but it still made more sense than what Art had said. How are you making this happen? I asked. Come on, joke's over. Stop messing with me. Art didn't respond. He just looked at me. I looked back down, unnerved. Then I saw Nathan turn in the drawing. He caught sight of me, and his eyes widened. He started yelling, unheard. It was like watching a movie on mute. Then I saw Nathan kneel down. He was writing something in the soil. I took a closer look. Help, he was writing. Art is dangerous. The chills went down my spine. Run. Get help, Nathan continued writing. Art sighed. He doesn't get that I'm doing this for us. He doesn't get it yet. I'm making a whole new life in a whole new world for us, for the people that made the cut. Art went to the table and pulled out another piece of paper from his drawer. He placed it in front of me. I spotted it immediately. The figure of me, He had drawn me at a playground. It was similar to the one in our town, but a much fancier, more aesthetically pleasing version. I was building a sandcastle in the picture. The drawing of me didn't move. There was something flat about it. It lacked the spark of realism that the other drawings had. "Touch it," Art said. "Let's go. I've my own one drawn up. Let's go into this town together." "No," I said, gritting my teeth. "You've got to let them out." He stared back at me and sighed again. "I knew you would take time to get used to the idea. Just touch the figure of yourself. You can see for yourself the town we'd be living in, the world I created. You'll realize how much better it is than this world." I started to back away. Then he grabbed me. In a few quick moves, he got behind me and pressed me to his chest. There was a knife at my throat. My mouth gaped open in shock. I couldn't believe what was happening. Art had never pulled a knife on anyone. He wasn't a violent person. "Now, place your hand on your picture. Do it now." I didn't move. The knife bit slightly into my neck. It stung. "I'm sorry. I really don't want to hurt you. This is for your sake. It's for our sakes. We need to go there. We need to be in a better place." "Why don't you go there yourself? Why drag us into this?" I asked, anger rising past the fear. I don't want to be alone. I want others there. Good people there. "Let me go, Art. Art, please, you've got to stop this. Let them out." At that tense moment, there was the sound of a car pulling up in the front of the house. "They're not supposed to be back for another week," Art cried. Sensing his hold weaken for a second, I grabbed the arm holding the knife and jerked backwards, knocking him off balance. He fell back with a thud and released his hold on me. I smashed his hand into the floor and the knife clattered to the side. Looking around wildly, I grabbed the pencil holder from his table. The pencil holder was a steel sculpture that mimicked rows of paintbrushes lined together to form a box shape. It was a gift I had given him for his birthday when we were teens. I paid $5 for it at a yard sale. He had loved it. With all the force I could muster, I swung the steel holder into his head as he was trying to get up. It connected with a dull thud, and Art flopped back down. He stopped moving. Blood started to ooze from his head. Gripped with fear, I checked his pulse. He was still alive. I breathed out the breath I'd been holding. Then I heard the front door opening. I looked at the scene before me and realized what it would look like to his parents. I was screwed. Then an idea flashed into mind. I hurriedly searched for his drawer. Sure enough, there it was. A drawing of Art himself, in the town square. He was holding a sign that said, "Welcome to our new home." I grabbed the drawing and rushed over to Art's inert body. I placed his hand on the drawing figure of himself. Nothing happened for a moment. Then, right in front of my incredulous eyes, Art seemed to get sucked into the picture. His hand and arm went in first, then his entire body got drawn into the small space on the picture, distorting in size as it went in. Then Art was gone. From this world, at least. I looked at him in the picture. The smiling picture of him was now replaced by his unconscious form, lying on the ground. Around the drawing of his head, red trickled out. I wiped up the spot of blood on the floor, with his shirt strewn on his bed. I stuffed it in the backpack. I hastily grabbed the other pieces of paper with Nathan, Eddie, and Sean on them. I then grabbed as many of the other pieces of artwork as I could, and stuffed them into my backpack. "Arthur, are you home?" The voice sounded out from downstairs. Composing myself and finger-combing my hair in place, I slung my backpack on. Then I opened the door, a smile plastered on my face. "Hey, Jamie," Arthur's mum was one of those hip ladies who insisted that you call them by their first names. "Hey you, you're here. Where's Arthur?" Art went out to get some stuff he left at school. He told me to wait here, but it's been quite a while and he's not back yet. I really do have to go though. My parents are waiting for me for movie night. Ah, right. You get going along then. Don't keep your fam waiting. I'll let Arthur know when he's back. Yeah, alright. Thanks, Jamie. I'll see you around soon. Hope you had a good vacation. I did indeed. Too bad it was cut short. Emergency work stuff and such. Well, I won't keep you. Go along then. Yeah, right. Bye, Jamie. I hurried out the front door. I sat alone in my room, the 5 drawings of us ahead of me. The others were gone from their respective drawings now, and they were all surrounding Art in the town square. They didn't seem particularly inclined to help him. I'm not sure what to do next. Perhaps I'll go to the police. But I'd shown my parents the pictures, thinking that there was no way I could explain what was going on. They had to see for themselves. They didn't see anything. They just saw this still, unmoving image of the town square. When I kept pointing out the 4 figures in the square, they just looked at me with bewilderment, exchanging looks of alarm with each other. When my dad suggested calling the emergency psych services, I changed track really quickly. I pretended that it was all a joke, an experiment my friends and I had agreed to do on our parents. They got mad then. I just kept saying sorry and they rebuked me, then excused myself to my room. The police weren't a good idea. I stared at them, looking up at me from the picture for a while longer, feeling helpless. Then I tucked them in my drawer. I wanted to wait for Art to wake up, to tell me how they could get out. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept Googling possible ways to undo whatever Art had done, but couldn't get anything usable or feasible. When the sky lightened again, I was still hard at work, listing out all the ways I could think of, or that was suggested online. I was going to try them all by one. I glanced at the art pieces again. They were no longer in the town square. I found them in the cottage, the one with the fireplace. I did a double take when I saw what they were doing. Art was tied up on the floor. Nathan was holding a poker in the fire, heating it up. The rest were watching nervously. They appeared to be asking Art questions. Eddie looked up and saw me. He started gesturing, then went out of the picture for a moment. He came back with a pen and paper. I had to squint to see what he was writing. Art's coming for you. He knows a way. We will find out. I could feel the blood drain from my face. Did I fear for Art, or did I fear more for myself? If Art had a way of getting out, that meant I was still in danger, but that also meant my friends could get out. Nathan looked up at me, holding the poker. He must have seen the horror on my face, because he mouthed, "Don't look." He pulled the poker from the fire. It was white hot at the end. He moved towards Art, as the rest took a step back. I took Nathan's advice and rolled the paper up. I was glad I couldn't hear them. I didn't want to hear Art's screams, or smell Art's flesh sizzling. I placed the rolled up sheets in my wardrobe and locked it. It was up to them now.
Hello listeners, if you enjoyed this story, please check out the author in the description. For more content, leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more sinister readings.